Prop 47.
This was the stealing legalization.
It was called euphemistically the Safe Neighborhoods and Schools Act. And the idea behind it was we would address the mass incarceration problem, reduce the prison capacity by shifting nonviolent offenders out of state prisons and treating thefts under $950 as misdemeanors. Prior to this law, thefts at $400 would be felony grand larceny. And this law changed it such that it would have to be above $950 to become a felony. So, as a consequence of this, there was also as another factor of Prop 47 was that drug possession would no longer be a felony. It would be treated as a misdemeanor. And this has also exacerbated the drug and homeless problem. In fact, I think in the years right after Prop 47 went into effect, the number of ER overdose cases was up 25%.
So this is the law that legalized stealing and drug use.
Correct.
Effectively.
Yes.
So I remember this very well. And I think I remember Rob Reiner, who's an enemy of civilization, being one of the many celebrity backers of this. But it was quite popular. I mean, like a lot of famous people were behind this.
Oh yeah. Well, Kamala Harris wrote the law that appeared on the ballot. And
Kamala Harris did?
Yes, because in California, the Attorney General of the state will write the language and the title for every proposition put before
Harris is the one who wrote the Legalized Stealing Act.
Yes. And I will tell you, Steve Cooley calls it fraud by misrepresentation. And there is a poison pill within Prop 47 that is quite shocking. And she was actually called out for it by the Sacramento Bee. And that is that these reclassified offenders would no longer be subject to mandatory and standard DNA testing. As a result, DNA testing for across the state went from 15,000 a month to 5,000 a month. And DNA testing is super, super critical for the solving of cold case homicides, rapes, and other violent crimes that, are typically associated with people with track records of crime. So these nonviolent, larceny type offenders are very likely, or at least, it should be investigated whether they have some kind of connection to other crimes, as we've seen, everywhere. So
a small number of people commit the overwhelming majority of crime in every society.
So Kamala Harris's description in the ballot for 47 basically obfuscated this issue of the DNA testing. And the Sacramento Bee called her out on it and said that this was effectively a misrepresentation and a failure on her part to omit this information from the voters.
Or the authors of this are taking the side of rapists over the population.
Oh yeah. And well, I'll tell you also, she was not alone in writing this, the language. I mean, Kamala Harris doesn't do anything, right?
Right.
She does. She's a facilitator, and an opportunist, and every action really she has taken in California has been on the basis of what is good for Kamala Harris.
Right.
But what I have heard from my sources, who are certainly would know, with Prop 47, it was significantly influenced in terms of the language by prominent figures from the criminal justice reform movement, and even entities affiliated with George Soros, who's always been a funder of criminal justice reform.
So they sold this as good for the California budget, good for the safety of your neighborhood, sort of the opposite of the truth. Well, literally the opposite of the truth. And people bought it. What was the margin?
60%.
60%.
Yes.
Committed civilizational suicide without knowing it.
Yes. We sowed our own demise.
Yes.
And we did so because our leaders manipulate language. nonviolent offender, for instance, is not nonviolent offender. In fact, in the next law that came about that was, again, on our pathway to destruction, Prop 57, which passed in 2016, that law, again, which Kamala Harris wrote the language for, and which she was excoriated by other Democrats when she was running for higher office, particularly Loretta Sanchez. Prop 57 was, again, to address mass incarceration and would offer additional parole opportunities for offenders that were deemed to be, quote, nonviolent. But what is nonviolent under Prop 57? It is anything that is not one of 23 specific crimes that is in an obscure section of the penal code. So nonviolent could be drug trafficking, human trafficking, rape by intoxication, some forms of assault, financial crimes, serious financial crimes, and basically these offenders under this provision would have opportunities for parole, and also parole administration was also passed down to the county levels, who again didn't have the resources to handle this new burden. So there's a striking example of
this was a ballot initiative also.
Passed again, I think by a pretty good margin, and not as famous, infamous as 47, but very destructive. There's a case of a offender released under this who went on to kill like 4 or 5 people in a mass shooting, gang related, like within 2 years of release. Because of course, when they go into the parole system, the parole system is completely incompetent at the local levels. They do not have the resources. And there was a participation rate of offenders of 9% in rehabilitation programs. And the idea, and the cornerstone of 57 was, we are taking these, people that, they are nonviolent and they can be redeemed, right? But it's really just a gimmick that is driven by, again, this mandate by the Supreme Court, but also by the influence of criminal justice reform advocates. Kamala Harris, as Attorney General of California in 2012, under the auspices of so-called budget reform, eliminated a 100-year-old agency called the Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement. And it is widely held amongst law enforcement officers and on the prosecution side that this was a very important task force for fighting organized crime. It had been doing so since Prohibition, and then it became a major force in disrupting narcotics trade in the state. She disbanded it.
Well, because she's for narcotics. She wants a drug-addicted population, obviously.
She does whatever she's told.
But I'm just saying, these drug cartels are powerful because they're ruthless. They're a cult based on witchcraft, but they're also really rich.
Of course, they're Fortune 500 companies.
Exactly. So at some point, like in Mexico, they're in control still because they've paid off all the politicians.
Well,
is that happening in California yet?
It's not clear to me whether that's happening to the extent. I'm certainly, as expressed by Tom Homan when I spoke to him, he says that it's very hard often to distinguish the Mexican elite from the Mexican drug cartels. Like there's an interwoven nexus.
Yeah.
And of course, like in parts of Mexico, the cartels exert actual like authority and governance over certain regions.
In the Sierra Madre, for example.
But it's not really clear to me if they are influencing politicians or through grift or through bribes or anything. I'm not clear on that.
Yeah. It's just if not, it's just a matter of time.
But I will tell you that a director of the LAPD union said to me that the cartels are increasingly committing ransom attacks in San Diego. of high-profile families, and this is not getting reported.
Kidnapping, as is so common in Latin America.
Exactly. Yeah, they take him across the border, and so special security forces made up of ex SEALs and whatnot have to go into Mexico and extract them. This is now apparently rampant.
It's insane, but it shouldn't surprise us. That's a fact of life in Mexico City.
I mean, human trafficking is also a very serious problem in the state. And it's of course more lucrative in some ways than the drugs because they can be used as over and over and over again as sex slaves, right? So it's like a recurring revenue stream. Although fentanyl should not be underplayed in any way. Fentanyl produces 200,000% margin.
Yeah.
And fentanyl, according to one of the top gang enforcement detectives in LA County, based out of Compton, ex-special forces guy, black guy, incredible man. He said to me, fentanyl, it's so ubiquitous, it's like salt. And if you buy a pill off the street, it has fentanyl in it. And that's why, in fact, it's so deadly and so dangerous that even the cartels are thinking that maybe we need to come up with something not quite as lethal because we're killing our customers.
Can I just ask, since you mentioned Compton, so Compton was the largest black population west of the Mississippi since the Second World War.
Not anymore.
I was just there. It's Spanish speaking. So you've had, the black population of huge parts of LA moved east into the Inland Empire,
right,
murdered in huge numbers by newcomers. And I've never heard, and Maxine Waters supposedly represents Compton, though she doesn't live there, but I've never heard a single black politician in California mention the fact that illegal immigration has completely overturned life for a lot of black people in California. Not one time have I heard anybody say that. Why? What about your corrupt pigs?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, but I think it's due to the fact that the power is now, the locus of power is with the newcomers.
Of course.
It's not in their interest to ever comment on these things.
But if your job is to represent your constituents or your people,
when have Democrats ever represented black people?
Well, fair. I know. It's just it's shocking this could happen, and everyone's watching it, or people who are paying attention are seeing it. Especially if you're from California, you're well, this is very different from what it was 10 years ago, and nobody says a word.
You know what's interesting? So in prison, the prison system, the black gangs, it's all obviously racially segregated, but the black gang is called the Black Guerrilla Family, and again, according to this gang enforcement specialist that I spoke to, he said, well, for the Mexicans, it's about money and power. For the Black Guerrilla Family, their enemy is the government, and they're political. And I thought to myself, well, at least they have an ethos.
No, I agree. It's just interesting. California state prisons are totally racially segregated.
Yeah.
In fact, they were ordered desegregated at one point, and then the prisoners complained. The black prisoners complained because there's so many that were getting killed.
Yeah. I mean, look, the fact that this sort of level of criminality can exist within the prisons, it's such an indictment of the system overall. I mean, it's a joke. And in fact, all these cops I talk to say the gangsters laugh at us. They have no fear of us. They do not fear the state.
Then how are the prison guards the highest paid state employees in California?
Because public sector unions have enormous power in Sacramento.
But I mean, and I think that was always true. Prison guards are always the highest paid.
I mean, it's a dangerous job.
I agree. I know prison guards. I've always liked them. But on the other hand, if your job is to guard the prison and you're getting paid more than anybody else working for the state in California, and the gangs run the prisons, and that's there's something wrong with that.
Look, obviously there's enormous corruption such that phones are smuggled in. A communication network obviously exists, because how are you able to manage a criminal empire from within jail? How are you able to order executions and hits within jail? So it's porous. But I think the bigger issue ultimately, and this is why I don't think it's the prison guards' fault, it's the state's fault.
Kamala Harris dismantled the anti-narcotics task force that had been around since Prohibition. I'm wondering, though, she has bragged publicly about dismantling the cartels. That doesn't seem like the behavior of someone who's dismantling cartels.
How could she dismantle the cartels? I just explained that the cartels run the state.
Right, that's right. So when she says that, I mean, there's no truth in that at all.
There's no truth in anything that she says. I mean, she is the avatar of moral bankruptcy that represents the state of California.
Yeah.
Hollow, superficial, stupid, sociopathic. And I will tell you, everyone that I know Democrats who have worked with her, including like a very elite consulting firm that tried to manage her campaign at one point, they say that she is lazy. Steve Cooley also says that, by the way. She was a lazy prosecutor. And she is vicious. And when she doesn't do her homework and gets caught in word salads because she doesn't know what she's talking about, she then lashes out on her staff. So she's kind of like a even dumber version of Hillary Clinton. I think, fortunately, like, she's so inept that the country is starting to see that. I pray to God, because if Kamala Harris rises to the level of the presidency, we now have basically exported California nationwide. And as I told you, and it's the name of my book, it is called Failed State, a portrait of California in the twilight of empire.
I can't think of a sadder title or a more accurate one. And I just refer back to my own childhood in that state. I mean, the distressing thing is it's not like wrecking, I don't know, I don't want to be mean, but I could think of a couple states that, whatever, who cares? California was the greatest place on planet Earth.
Of course.
Yeah. So,
but what's interesting about Kamala, she actually did go after, drug crimes, but she went after people who were smoking weed.
Yeah. The easy ones. Right? A lot of black people. Yeah, but she did not go after the cartels bringing in the drugs.
Of course not.
No. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.